Imagine you're running for president of a club. You've worked hard campaigning to your peers, you're fully qualified, and you've just won all of their votes. Then suddenly the academic advisor decides that he likes your opponent more than you and gives him the role and leaves you with nothing. How does that make you feel? This is essentially how the Electoral College works in some instances. And so today I would like to provide you with all of the evidence necessary to convince you that the Electoral College is an unjust manner in which to elect the next U.S. president, and that there are better processes to do so, primary of which being the popular vote. Just like me, a lot of you are probably voting for the first time in this election, and it should be really important to you that your vote is just as equal as anybody else's in this country. So, the policy which deems the Electoral College the manner in which the U.S. president is elected is inequitable, corrupt, and more subject to change than most people realize, which is why it should be replaced with the popular vote. So for starters, the Electoral College is inequitable. In some states, the weight of a vote is different than in other states. There's a specific formula to decide how many electors are in each state, which is equal to its population relative to other states, plus 2 more votes equal to its representation in the Senate. But it is important to remember that some states, well, all states have a minimum of 3 electors. So for really small states, where in that formula they may have under 3 electors, they end up having 3, which gives them more weight than it would normally. And so one of these states that has a lot of control in elections is Ohio. Ohio doesn't necessarily have more weight than other states, but because it is such a narrow swing state, they end up being a deciding factor in almost every single election. So, in fact, no Republican presidential candidate has ever won the presidential election without also winning Ohio. Ohio has always played a factor. And an entire election can be reliant on a single state's outcome. A more concrete example of this is the 2000 election, where Al Gore won the popular vote by over 500,000 votes, but lost the Electoral College to George W. Bush by 5 votes. The entire election ended up depending on the result of Florida, where Bush won by a narrow victory of 537 votes out of the 6 million cast that night. So to me, it seems more important to look at the 500,000 votes cast nationally for one candidate versus 500,000 in Florida, and that seems unfair. So also, the Electoral College is corrupt. The designated electors for each state is not required to vote for the candidate its state votes for. This is known as a faithless elector. In the 2016 election, Clinton won the national vote by 2.2%, but Trump won the Electoral College by 77 votes. And in this election, there were 7 faithless electors. I'm not saying this would change the results of the election at all. It just seems unfair that 7 states' votes throughout the country were completely ignored by their electors. Historically, one person has had the power to change the outcome of an election for his or her own benefit. In the 1824 election, Andrew Jackson lost to John Quincy Adams, despite losing the popular vote by over 338,000 votes. Because none of the candidates had a majority in the first round of the election, they went down from 4 to 2. And during that second part of the election, Henry Clay, who had been a running candidate but was eliminated, ended up convincing the entire House of Representatives to vote for Adams, who then made him his Secretary of State. So the entire result of this presidential election was just for Henry Clay to move up politically and in his job. Lastly, elector votes can be compromised as a means to accomplish political and military goals. In the 1876 election, Rutherford B. Hayes lost the popular vote by a majority vote to his opponent Tilden. He was up by 19 votes in the Electoral College, but there still were 20 votes in dispute. So here comes the compromise of 1877. All of these 20 disputed votes ended up going to Hayes, which gave him the presidency over Tilden. And this was all a part of the deal with the Republicans to remove troops from the South to end Reconstruction. The presidential results came as a military tactic, which is incredibly corrupt. Change within the Electoral College is more feasible and attainable than most people realize. A lot of people's arguments in support of the Electoral College is that it gives smaller states a more equal and fair voice throughout the country. And that's totally true. I'm not arguing with it. But it seems to me that the benefits gained for a small state in election does not outweigh the benefits a country's decision as a whole should hold. Another argument to maintain the Electoral College is that it's un-American to reform such a historical system, but there's examples of countries all over the world who have reformed their voting processes with positive results. France once had a system much similar to our electoral college, but recently changed it to a two-part popular vote election. So if one candidate doesn't win the majority in the first part, they narrow down the candidates and have a revote, and whoever wins the majority wins. And you might argue that France has a smaller population and a lot less political polarization, which is totally true. So another country that has switched to the exact same two-part majority vote system is Indonesia. And while you may not realize it, their voter turnout is actually a lot more closer to ours. It's not quite the same, but a lot closer, and they have had a lot of popular or beneficial results. Lastly, there is a petition among some U.S. states already to turn to a more popular vote-based election. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an agreement that's been adopted by 15 states already and D.C., in which they've agreed that whichever candidate wins the popular vote in their state or in the country will win all the elector votes for their state. And so this will only go into effect once they've won in a majority of the electors. So they need 270, and as of right now, they have 196. But this just goes to show that the country does believe there is a more fair way, and they're doing everything they can to do so right now. So in conclusion, the utilization of the Electoral College in the presidential election should be replaced with the popular vote in order to preserve and restore past, present, and future equity and democracy within the U.S. The use of the Electoral College makes votes within certain extreme states futile and makes voting in these areas discouraging. There is a history of cases in which the Electoral College does not match the popular vote, and a history of corruption, meaning that the people in charge of the government don't have to respect the votes of their people. Lastly, there's already a movement among several states to adopt a policy that maintains the integrity of the popular vote as best they can in this environment. Considering the extremely diverse opinions and the constantly changing nature of our country and its people, it's absolutely crucial that everyone's vote is validated and heard, and the popular vote is the only way to do so.